Okay, folks, so we are going to go ahead and wrap up the final part of today's lecture, or our lab portion, right? So when you head on to Blackboard, there's actually going to be one more lecture video, a part 4. That's this one that I'm recording at the moment. But what you will see is two other files, a lecture for survey data and a lecture for SAS code. So what I want you to do now is to pause the video and download both of these files and save them somewhere on your computer where you know how to access them. So I suggest creating a folder on your desktop and then saving those files from there. So go ahead, pause the video now, and then do this, right? So this is going to be a SAS file, .sas, and then this is going to be an Excel file, .xlsx, right? What we're going to do is we're going to refresh, give you a little primer and refresh in terms of how to upload data and pull in code. This is going to be really important for the midterm, right? So go ahead and let's practice this and go through and work through this together. All of this should feel very, very familiar, and I'm confident that you'll be able to go ahead and do this, especially if you just kind of watch along this video, right? So pause the video, go ahead, download these, save them to your desktop. We have a new data set that we're going to work with, and we have some new code, but they're both going to feel very, very familiar, okay? So pause, and I'll see you in a little bit. And so I'm making the assumption that you paused for a little bit. I didn't pause, I just went straight through. I saved the files already on my desktop, and I'm going to open up SAS Studio, right? Your SAS Studio actually should probably look something like this, right? You already have some code up on your screen. All good, right? Doesn't make a difference. I'm going to close this actually because we're going to roll with new code, and we're going to roll with a new data set, right? So let's do this. So the first thing that you're going to go ahead and do is in your file path, you're going to right click and you're going to click upload files, right? Remember, the first thing that we do is we want to upload our files to the cloud. So we're going to click upload files. You're going to hit choose files, and you're going to navigate to where you saved those files to, right? So you see that I saved mine on the desktop, Finesse 702, Lecture 4. First thing I'm going to upload is the survey data. I'm going to select that, upload, click upload, and here you go. The survey data is up there, and I see that it's in this path right over there. Remember, we're going to need to reference this later, right? But we also have another bit of code, two files, right? So we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to repeat, and we're going to say upload files. We're going to choose files, go back to that same part, and now we're going to upload this lecture4 underscore code.sas file, right? That's the code that we're going to use for today's lecture. So double click that, click upload, voila, right? So now you see lecture4 code.sas. Double click that, and here you go. You should see some pretty familiar code, although some of these might be kind of new, right? I've added, remember, anything that's in green, these are comments that I'm making to you, right? Always remember that when there are codes, these are comments that I'm making to you, and you can go ahead and make these whatever comments yourself. Now, I'm going to make changes in this file at this moment. You should be following along, and I'm going to try to give you all time to do it, but just feel free to pause whenever I complete a step. And you know what? I'll make it a point to try to remind you to pause the video at this point. So remember, this line of code, our proc import code, this is to, now that we've uploaded it to SAS, now what we need to do is bring this in to our working environment so that we can analyze this data. You always, always, always have to run this code before you do any analysis. So if you close the browser and come back, rerun the proc import, right? You have to bring it back into the environment. You don't have to re-upload it, but you have to import it into the file, right? So the first line of code is the out file, right? Which is, what do you want to name this data set when you bring it in, right? The second line is, and you know what? I noticed I never showed you this before, but I'm going to go ahead and show you this now. if you go down to libraries on the left-hand side and unnest it, and then unnest my libraries, you will see a folder called work. This is why we call it work, by the way, right? And if you take a look, oh, these shouldn't be here. Let's remove this one. Don't do this step. I'm just trying to show you something real quick. No need to do this, though. No need to do these deleting. Okay, so when you open up your work, it should be empty, right? So you click My Libraries and Work, and it should be empty. There should be nothing in there. But now what's going to happen is you're going to import this data in, and you're creating a file called Finesse. It's going to show up in this work file, right? But so just make a note now, right? Look, your work folder is empty under Libraries. So let's close that, and let's come back to our files. Data file equals, now this is the file path, and what you want this to point to is the new data set that you just uploaded, right? Make sure, you see how I made a note here, make sure to change this, right? The original data set that we worked off of is Finesse 702 survey.xlsx, right? The new survey data set that we imported is called Lecture 4 survey dataset.xlsx. This is new data that we're working with, right? So what we want to do is we want to right click, go down to Properties, and what we want to do is copy the location, beginning to end. We'll hit Close, and then replace everything in the, what are these called? Quotation marks. I forgot quotation marks, right? Now, what you also want to go ahead and do is change the sheet name. And I forgot what the sheet name is, so I'm going to stop this video. We're going to stop at this point, and I'm going to come back. Bear with me one moment. So the sheet name is Lecture 4, right? So by the way, so when you open the data set, you'll see that it looks very familiar, but I've added some special guests to our data sets like Eli Manning and Michael Jackson and such, but this is how you find out the sheet name, by the way. So Lecture 4 is the sheet name, and I hope that I'm not going to lose the video when I toggle back. Great, I didn't lose it. Perfect. So now we see the sheet name in the original data set was Finesse 702 survey, but the sheet in the new data set is Lecture 4. And notice how I made a point here, right? Make sure to change this, right? None of these other ones that you need to change. So let's go ahead. We're going to highlight, and we're going to hit Running Man. And notice now our new data set has been brought in, right? It looks very familiar. One of the big differences is that I cleaned up the major, so there's only PE and exercise or nutrition, and you'll notice that I've added some extra rows, some extra students, right, such as Taylor Swift, Homer Simpson, Elton John, Grace Ming. I don't know why my local congresswoman popped into mind, Eli Manning, Michael Jackson, but anyway, so we have some fake data that I added in here just to increase our sample size to go ahead and make sure that we're able to go ahead and do what we want to do, right? So this is a good point to pause right now and remember, right, here's what we've done so far. You uploaded the new data set to your folder. You uploaded the new code to your folder, you opened the new code, you changed the file path, and you changed the sheet name. And then also, before I forget, right, we had mentioned before, remember how your work libraries was empty before? So when you click on libraries and you head down to work, notice now there is a file, FNES, right? Work.fnes. So whenever you run analysis now, you point to this folder, and this is where it's going to be saved. Now this is going to be important. We'll come back later, and I think it'll make a lot more sense. So this is a good time to pause, and this is a good time for you to go ahead and run this block of code. Okay? And once you're done with that, you should have this file here. You should have outputted data. You know success when you go ahead and you see this data set, and when you scroll down and you see Eli Manning and Homer Simpson and Marge Simpson in the data set, then you know you're good to go, right? Let's head back to the code. Here's what we want to go ahead and do now, right? We want to get the mean, the n, the mean, and the standard deviation for the whole population, right? The whole population is everybody in our data set. Now, you know that we have 22 students in our class, but, you know, I just added some special guests to our data set too, right? So we don't know what the n is. We don't know what the mean is. We don't know what the standard deviation is, right? So let's find this out. So we're going to run our proc mean statement. There's nothing to change here because we're interested in height, and we're pointing to this data set right here, right? Now, if we wanted to go ahead and look at something else, like a number of hours slept, you would just change this variable here. But we're not interested in that yet, right? We're just going to highlight this, and we're going to hit Running Man. And now you're going to see in our, let me zoom in our new data set, we have 36 people. The average height is 66.7 inches, and the standard deviation is 3.31, right? So now, let's go back to the code. What we want to go ahead and do now is let's create a histogram. Let's visualize this, right? Is this normally distributed? Is this skewed? And take a time now and think about your classmates, right? Is there somebody really tall in the class? Is there somebody really short in the class? Or are we all about average, right? Do we all fit kind of a normal distribution? Well, let's see. Let's click Running Man. And we have some statistics here, right? So now 66.7, standard deviation is 3.31 inches, right? So that means if you're one standard deviation away from the norm, you're either 3 inches taller or 3 inches less, right? So we talk about variance here. All the information is all provided. The mean, median, the mode, right? So you see that 65 appears the most, 67 is right smack in the middle. Our standard deviation is 3 inches, which 3 inches is a lot, right? You know, I'm 5'10", but I'd much rather be 6'1", that's for sure. So 3 inches it's not nothing, but it's not that much. And then we have our quartiles here. And this is our distribution, right? So you'll notice that we're kind of skewed to the left again, right? We have some taller folks right over here, but for the most part, we're somewhat normally distributed. I suspect that our new friends like Eli Manning and Homer Simpson kind of skewed our distribution a little bit, but that's okay, right? So this is how to create a histogram. So we know how to create a histogram. Now what we're going to go ahead and do is use SAS to create a sample of this data set, right? So our population is 30, what did we say it was? It was 36, right? So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to have SAS randomly take out randomly go ahead and create a population, okay? So we use this new statement now called proc survey select, right? The data set that we want to work off of is the work.fnes. So notice in my comments, data set that you want to sample from, right? Notice I have a method equals SRS, right? You don't have to change this, but SRS stands for simple random sample. The n equals, right, and I have 10 here, the number of people you wish to sample, right? But you can change this. You can have 5, you can have 6, you can have, you know, some increment less than 36 because 36 is our n, right? And then now you notice we have an out statement here, right? Now notice we have an out statement in the proc import line, And now we have an out statement in the proc survey select. And we're going to name this work.sample_1, right? It was actually named sample 1 before, but let's just say the first sample, right? You can name this whatever you want. And now let's go ahead and highlight this. Let's do the running man. And if you get an output that looks like this, it tells you your sample size, right? And then you click over to output data. We'll take a look and notice, right? Christina, Jennifer, Pamela, right? Brandon, you all made it. You're in the sample right over here. Marge Simpson, Eli Manning, Susan Storm, Grace Mings, they also made it, right? So these are the 10 folks that we randomly selected from our data set. And how else do we know that we've done a data set? Well, 1, you didn't get an error. 2, you have outputs here that you can look at. And then when you go down to My Libraries and you go to the work, notice, here we go, Finesse Sample 1, right? Finesse is the population data set. This is everybody, right? And then your sample 1. This is your first sample. So now you're going to come back to your code, and let's get the means now. Let's get the average, right, for sample 1. So notice the big difference here. Notice I have a code here, and this is the data set you created in line 19. It's not line 19 anymore. It's actually line 26, right? Up here. Notice work.sample1, right? This is what we created, so we want to replace this name here. Work.sample1. This is what we created. This is it here, sample 1, and then we want the average height. So let's go ahead and run this. And now notice the average of the sample, the 10 that we picked, is 65.3 with a standard deviation of 3.26, right? So let's talk about this now. Let's think about this, how we just did. We have a class, there's 36 people in it. We want to know, hey, look, let's take a sample of this population. We don't have time to measure everybody's height. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to measure just a sample of people's height and then try to extrapolate and say, well, look, the average is this, right? So does anybody remember what the average height was before? Let's just remember 65.3, 3.26, right? And then if we look at the average for the entire population, 66.7, 3.31, right? So we're off by about an inch. So you see, this is kind of how sampling goes ahead and works, right? We get to go ahead and do a lot less work, right? We don't have to measure everybody's height, and we kind of get an idea of where everybody goes ahead and stands. Now let's take a look at the histogram for this sample that we created, right? So notice I have to change this. Work.sample_1. Histogram, right? Let's scroll down and take a look. And now notice our distribution looks a lot different, right? But the average is 65.3, right? So what we are going to do now is you are going to test the central limit theorem, right? What you're going to go ahead and do is you're going to create another sample data set. You're going to run this same line of code, right? So let's look at our library here. Let's look at our work. See how this is sample 1? We're going to run this line of code again, but what we're going to do is we're going to create sample 2, right? And now let's go ahead and run this code. Now let's take a pause and let's think about what do we expect to happen, right? I just changed this from sample 1 to sample 2. What do we expect to happen when we run this block of code? Take a pause and think about it. So what we expect to happen is that when we run this, it's going to create another data set. It's going to be another 10 people who are selected, right? And remember, we sampled with replacement, which means we pulled 10 people out, those 10 people go back in, and now they have an equal chance of being selected again. So let's run this. Perfect, right? No errors. We haven't outputted data. Would you take a look at that, right? I believe Brandon was selected in the previous one. I know Homer was definitely selected in the previous one, right? So now when you go back to My Libraries and you go down to the work folder, you have sample 1, you have sample 2, right? Let's take a look at sample 1. Let's look at the data in sample 1. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry, I was wrong. Homer was not selected in the first sample. Let's see who was. So Eve Bernstein, Dr. Bernstein was here. Nope, she was not selected. Oh, why am I struggling here? Let's see. Okay, Christina, you were selected in the first sample, and you were in the second sample, right? So you're a representative in both samples now. Now, let's think back to the central limit theorem, right? What we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to get the average now, or the mean, for each one. So we know what the average for work sample 1 was, right? Just to confirm, you can do Running Man on work sample 1. Here it is, right? 65.3. So what you're going to do is you're going to record this value, right? I'm going to upload an Excel sheet where you are going to go ahead and record these values. You're now actually collecting data. And now let's run the average for work sample 2, right? Now let's take a look at those results just for a second. 65.3. Now let's look at the average height for the second sample. 66.2, right? And now what you're going to do is you're going to do this over and over and over again. You're going to keep sampling, and we're going to build another data set. So now you're going to change this to work sample 3. You're going to resample again with replacements for the assignment, and you're going to go and we're going to build a massive data set where then we're going to go ahead and test the central limit theorem to go ahead and see if this is correct. So this ends it for the lecture. For the assignment portion, what you're essentially going to do is you're going to repeat and you're going to keep sampling, and I'm going to show you, I'm going to provide another video shortly to go ahead and show you essentially how we want to go ahead and collect this and how we plan on analyzing this, or at least I'll provide instructions. It might not be a video, but it'll be instructions. Okay, thanks everyone. Oh, and just a reminder, office hours Tuesdays 7 to 8. Use the Google Meet link that's in the syllabus. All right, have a good one everyone. Reach out if you have any questions. Bye.